Thanks, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panel members, but to be honest, for those of you from Hawaii, probably we need no introduction. To my right, Representative Chris Lee, Chairman of the House Committee on Energy and Environment. To my left, Alan Oshima, President of Hawaiian Electric, Mayor Alan Arakawa, longtime mayor of Maui, and Brian Kealoha, who just introduced himself with the Hawaii Energy Program. For our discussion over the next hour, we're going to talk about 5 specific questions, and in each case we're going to ask whether we're currently sending mixed messages. And I'll tell you what the 5 are, and then we can go ahead and move on to our discussion. So the 5 topics are first GEMS, which Brian will go ahead and explain, and it's related to the energy efficiency topic. The second one is solar hot water heaters versus grid interactive water heaters. The third one is encouraging the purchase of first-generation EVs, particularly the Nissan Leaf here in Hawaii. The fourth issue, bird kills and wind farms. And finally, local and state government efforts with regard to renewable energy. The idea here really is a free-ranging discussion, and frankly, if I'm doing my job well, the other panelists will just begin speaking to each other directly as these questions come up. But we are going to go ahead and start by asking Brian to explain to us. We just listened, and it sounds like you're doing all these good things in energy efficiency. So why has your budget been cut, and what is GEMS, and how does it relate to that?
Sure, thank you. I think, so there's several reasons why our budgets have been reduced. The way that our budgets are collected is it's a percentage of the total revenues that are collected by the utility. And so one, we've seen oil prices come down, and that's reduced the amount that has gone into the fund. The second is with the proliferation of a lot of net energy meter customers and solar customers, they're paying a lot less into the fund as well, especially when they net out to net zero. So those are contributors to it. Probably one of the largest contributors, and the reason why I think Doug wanted me to speak to it, is the GEMS program. And I think many of you are familiar, but for those who are not, it's the Green Energy Market Securitization Program, which is really driven to enhance clean energy and investment here in the state of Hawaii. At this point in time, there's been some challenges around getting some of that money deployed, and one of the unfortunate circumstances that results from that is that the interest and principal and some of the other costs that go to administer the program are coming out of the same public benefits fee. So while we're very supportive of GEMS and we think this is the kind of investment vehicles that can help accelerate the state to 100% clean energy, we also need to focus to make sure we're doing everything we can to deploy those funds as quickly as possible. As an example, there was recently a program modification to spend about $50 million to do energy efficiency within the Department of Education that was approved by the Commission. And those are the kinds of things that I think can be really effective in spending the money quickly, as well as having an impact to our state's goals through driving energy efficiency. However, there seems to be a number of problems in getting the money deployed even after that. So that's been one of the challenges, and I think, again, as a state, we need to look at there's 2 ways that we can get to 100%, and we have to invest in those 2 ways at least close to the same amounts.
I guess, did you want to add anything? I mean, from the legislative perspective, I mean, is GEMS being viewed as a success, as a failure, something unclear? Is there a clear answer yet?
Well, there have been a number of bills introduced this year and prior to repeal GEMS outright. And I think that's an indication that some legislators seem to have concerns, which I think rightly so. It's a program that I think was launched with a lot of fanfare and a lot of high expectations, and something like it here in Hawaii had never been done on its scale before. And it's definitely a learning curve, and I really want to commend DBED and the authority and everybody else who've been working on GEMS, because it was not as easy a process, I think, as anybody had imagined, getting through the PUC, seeing what the market ultimately did that changed the direction of the program. But nevertheless, I think for most legislators, there's an expectation that the programs that we set out deliver. And for some folks, not seeing the deployment of all that money as quickly as some would like clearly raised a lot of concerns. So I think right now it's a question of what do we do from here? How do we make the program successful? How do we make it fulfill its intended purpose? And one of the things that this year, right now, there's a couple bills moving on it that would try and accelerate that. I think Brian's right that there's so much more that can be done. It fulfills a purpose, but it's going to come down to, I think, leveraging what is the ideal path forward against what is the politically real path when it comes to public policy. And I know all you guys see politicians, we never disagree about anything. And so when I talk with my colleagues about this, everybody's lined up. But the reality is, I mean, because we don't often agree, and because people have a different area of focus on different kinds of policy, it comes down to education, which I think the various stakeholders are doing. I mean, they're going above board and then some to do. But secondly, compromise. And that's going to be the key. We're not going to see GEMS, I think, fulfill its initial purpose that we originally designed within that time frame. You know, that's come and gone. But I think what now it can be leveraged into is fulfilling what needs come down the pipe this year, next, and the next after that. And that's making sure that funding is available for the right kinds of projects, whether it's at the Department of Education with energy efficiency or out with on-bill repayment with homeowners who need the help most. That's something that we need to see, and I think despite the fact that there's pushback on the policy side from some folks who haven't seen that progress, I think can be demonstrated this year, both through some of the legislative corrections and fixes that are being made that would streamline that process and remove some of those barriers, as well as just deploy at least a few of the dollars out immediately so that we maintain that level of political support and public support for the program. Because at the end of the day, if this does become a real failure, then we all lose because of it.
Alan, did you want to add anything? I mean, I understand you all have to collect these on the bills for your customers as charges. Fair enough. Mayor, would you also? Yeah.
Yeah, anything that appears in our bill, of course, raises concerns for us. And if it's going to appear on our bill, we'll do everything possible to try to make it have its effect. But we're kind of a bystander in this. There are many things that appear in our bill that are not utility-driven, but and it causes perceptions of the utility just because of the bill. So if it's going to appear in our bill, we wish it the best success to reach its objectives. And we'll do our part, as we did in helping DBED and others try to find ways that how we could participate to get it on our bill. It's not automatic, right? So we wish it luck. I think there are a lot of stakeholders in this, and so we're going to do our part if we're called upon, but we hope to see it achieve its objectives.
Are we sending a mixed message on this? I mean, is efficiency a stepchild in what we're doing here?
Me?
I'd love to hear from all of you.
Well, I'll chime in then. When we start programs, we set the goals for the program. In this case, we're trying to deal with energy efficiency and we're trying to create the alternative energy opportunities. Oftentimes, we get sidetracked and we take away from the programs in order to fund other programs. The air conditioning in schools, for instance. It's necessary to have air conditioning in schools, but taking money out of these programs for that literally is creating a contradictory position when we're trying to go to alternative energies and cut back from the electrical use. So we have to be very careful that the goals that we set and the reasons we put money aside are actually being the driving factor of how we spend that money. And it's not unusual for this to happen because at the legislature you see a pot of money and you see a need and you're going to try and balance that out. And that is really what the job of the legislature is, to be able to try and meet the expenditures and the needs within the community, and sometimes you get away from the real goal. What I'm very concerned about when we start doing this is just like the retirement system. When we had a goal, if we left the money there, we would be having a stable retirement system for the employees. But we take too much money out of the programs and we don't drive toward the goal, we end up having to supplement somehow, or we end up not meeting the objectives of what we're trying to attain. And that becomes very problematic because one of the truisms is when you have a program that is supposed to be taking care of an issue and you have a substandard program, you generally don't introduce another program to correct it. You end up with a substandard program that doesn't meet the objectives. And that never meets the objectives, you defeat the purpose of having that program. So it's one of those things that I've seen over years of dealing with different forms of goals that have been set in the communities. So that's my fear with it, and that's where the contradiction come in. If we're trying to achieve energy efficiency, then we need to be able to put all the programs under the energy efficiency for energy efficiency. If we're going to be able to use money for something else, no matter how good it is, it shouldn't come from these pots.
And we're going to go ahead and move on to our second question, if that's okay, Brian. And audience, you're welcome to ask questions. We will have 10 to 15 minutes at the end. The next thing we're asking about is solar hot water heaters. And many of you know that in Hawaii, we do have a law that says for new residential construction, the norm or the expectation is there will be a solar hot water heater, and there is a variance process that can be used. And I guess our question here is, we see another philosophy that is also, being used here in Hawaii, and that is to have grid interactive water heaters where we can really have some control over the electrical load. So the question here is, are we sending a mixed message on our state policy? We have solar hot water heating, which is 100% renewable and has no emissions of any type. Then if we're replacing it with a grid interactive water heater, the percentage renewable that we're switching down to is whatever the utility's current percentage is. If we call it 26% for last year, then that tells you we're going from a 100% renewable solution to, a 74% solution. So anyway, our first question here is to Representative Lee, and we're really asking, is there a clear policy as far as, does our state favor direct solar thermal, or are we favoring control of the grid?
I think there's a bigger directive that the state has set forward in policy, and some of the counties as well, which is that we want to favor solar hot water heaters. That's the law right now. If you're building a new home, you've got to put one in or get a variance. I think the bigger issue that we're starting to see, before I get to answering the rest of your question, is that we're seeing incredible numbers of variances that allow for alternative kinds of hot water heating that takes either direct natural gas or other means. And those variances are being rubber stamped at rates that were never intended by the law when it was originally passed. And that's a huge concern, particularly where you have massive developments with thousands and thousands of homes that otherwise could either lend themselves toward direct solar hot water heating in terms of keeping that efficiency for those residences high and reducing their own bills, or acting as some sort of variable demand response or other functions that you'd have in an electric hot water heater. So I think that's the first bar, and that's the first real discussion that needs to be had, which is playing out right now at the Capitol. I do think when it comes to the difference between solar hot water and electric heaters for other purposes, for me, I think having that maximized efficiency is key. And that does mean a solar hot water system where it makes sense. If you're in a plain area where there's not a whole lot of cloud cover overhead. That being said, in other areas, these things do make sense. Being able to have a programmatic rate design that allows for rate recovery or some sort of other mechanism that can both favor the interests of the utility and its customers as a whole, or that particular consumer, I think is important. So I think there's definitely a balance there, but the number one thing is making sure that the law, as it's intended, is sending a direct signal and no mixed messages, which I think it is. So that just, I think, needs appropriate interpretation by the planning departments that are approving these things without giving them a single look.
Mayor, could you talk about the Maui Solar Roof Initiative, and if you feel like there's a county policy?
I want to add to that, if you're going to change, or...
Please, go ahead and...
I totally agree with Chris, and I think the mixed message we have in this state, unlike California, we don't have a decarbonization policy. We've chosen one path to get a renewable, clean policy for electric generation, but that's only 33% of our total carbon or fossil fuel use. And so the mixed messages are brought up by things like fuel substitution for solar, for hot water heating, to a fossil fuel that may be actually more convenient and maybe more cost efficient, at least on an outlay for capital. So the mixed messages to the consumer, I think the consumer is rightly somewhat confused about where are we actually headed and what is my role in this effort. And so from the electric side, we're fully committed to the electric generation side, but we get confused as well because fuel substitution for some of other electric uses on the part of our customers really frustrates the ability to integrate more renewables on a cost-effective basis for the benefit of all. And so that's the confusion. That's the policy decision that I think we have to wrestle with. The other is that in the grid integrated hot water heating that you raised, we have Kapolei lofts with grid integrated hot water heating, but it's paired with their rooftop solar. So what it's doing is reducing their peak demand for hot water heating because it's all done with the daytime solar when we have lots of solar on the grid. So I don't think you can pick just any one resource and say that should not be allowed. To Chris's point, you have to look at it, how does it fit with the entire strategy in a balanced portfolio of getting us all to the end of a renewable clean energy goal with all of us bearing some of the responsibility. Not any one is going to be perfect, and how you use it. In our company, we are all about hybrids right now. And it's frustrating for our staff who's not quite used to looking at hybrid solutions, but they're getting used to it because that's what we have to do.
And if I could add just one thing to build on both what Alan and Chris said, I think, because there isn't a silver bullet in all of this, solar water heating definitely has its place. And we think about what Cherry Wase just said about thinking about the consumers and what's in their best interest. I mean, we have to enable the marketplace for solar water heating if that's going to save the most money to be able to do that. But solar water heating is going to have some challenges in certain places, and that's where grid interactive water heating and these hybrid solutions make a ton of sense, where it's aligned. And again, we have to really be focused on how the people, so many of our residents have a hard time paying all of their bills as it is today. And so whatever we can do to drive down those costs that aligns with the 100% clean energy goal is how we need to focus. And to Alan's point, I think we have to be careful not to send the mixed messages out into our consumers and our residents.
Did you want to follow up about county policy, Mayor?
Well, from a county perspective, we're trying to get to 100% alternative, and we're trying to drive this direction. However, I think that when we're looking at the reality and how we develop the technology and how we're trying to force the community in this direction, we have to be very careful to take into consideration that not everyone can afford and not everyone is capable of just going directly into the direction that we want them to. So there are some types of units that cannot put in the kind of rooftop solar that we want or solar that we want to be able to apply. And some of the rules that we have right now don't allow for the community to have a uniform bank that they could then extend the courtesy of allowing all the residents in that community to be able to tap onto it. I know there's a bill going through the legislature, but until that is passed, and I haven't heard that it's passed yet, some members will be at the disadvantage because of the type of structure that they have, the type of conditions that they have, lack of space. And we have to be cognizant of the fact that you can't force everybody into a one-size-fits-all type of system. The goal needs to be put forth, and we need to be able to really push the goal. But again, we have to allow a little bit of time for people to adjust to be able to meet those goals. The newer homes, you can put stuff in, and a lot of it will depend on what the total cost of those units are. When we're looking at $600,000-$700,000 for a median income home, many families can't afford getting even close to it. And then if you're going to force the landlords to be able to put all of these things in, and they're going to rent it out, the rents are going to be exceedingly high. So we have to be able to find some way to balance out some of the old systems, new systems, and to integrate all of the different types of systems while at the same time keeping it practical for those that have not the ability to be able to make those changes and adjustments.
I just wanted to add, too, I think the mayor's spot on. The bigger issue, I think, stepping back for a second, when we hear from folks out in the community, as well as folks who are trying to build our affordable housing, as well as make it efficient and power it, is the total cost to people. Because it's not just a mortgage that people are buying into, right? It's an operating cost. It's the ability to pay for gas. It's all the things that add up to a monthly electric bill. And so what we're trying to do, I think, in the broad sense, with some of the policy, at least on the state side that we're dealing with right now, is figure out how to create transparency so that people, when buying into a new project, know not only what they're paying right up front in their mortgage, but what they're also going to pay in their maintenance fee and their electric bill and their transportation cost, and make that crystal clear. And what we found in some of the projects, at least on Oahu, is that you have all this tendency for developers in order to crank down the price as low as possible to give the lowest possible mortgage, are actually ratcheting up the overall cost for consumers because now they're going to pay more for more expensive power or more expensive appliances or whatever it is. And I think part of the effort that needs really to advance is to provide that truth in advertising, that ability for people to take advantage of the cheapest overall package. And I think that's one of the things that this starts to touch upon.
And actually, that's a really good segue to our next question, and that has to do with encouraging the purchase of first-generation EVs. The Nissan Leaf has one of the worst resale values ever recorded for any vehicle. I'm just telling you the fact. So a Leaf, we have a story that we provided to the panelists from USA Today last year. It said that a Leaf bought today is expected to retain only 11 to 13% of its original sticker price in 3 years, according to Kelley Blue Book. The utility and others offer calculators of what an EV purchase can save customers. And understanding that we do have a policy of encouraging renewable electricity, why is the utility making recommendations to anyone on car purchases? And, did any effort really get made here to explain the difference between leasing and purchasing when this advice was being given?
Let me first correct the premise. The USA Today article you read, if you read the next paragraph, says that is based upon the MSRP without the federal tax credits and other rebates. So what the utility was offering as a service to our customers without any recommendations was a national Nissan marketing program offering a $10,000 rebate in addition to up to $7,500 in federal tax credits to any purchaser by March 31. We were not making a recommendation to buy the Leaf. There was a pent-up demand, and friends and family of mine immediately took it up, and there was a large surge in Nissan Leaf purchases. I would not call it a first generation. Their battery life has increased every year of their production. It's a good car. My daughter drives one. I would extend that, however. So we did the calculation. If you take the rebate, $10,000, if you take the tax credit, and you do the Kelley Blue Book, it's very comparable to a very popular gas-fired vehicle, and I'm not going to promote that car, but it's a very popular car. So that's the false premise. I think what you have to be careful about when you talk about things like this is that customer transparency is owed in every purchase. We didn't do that for rooftop solar, nor were we asked to, nor is the state requiring that. So the truth in purchasing, even for your rooftop systems, and I've talked to the rooftop or the private solar people, where is the transparency? What is the life of the system? How much is it going to cost to replace it? What are your insurance needs with it? When do the inverters have to be replaced? All of these things are not in the fine print. And are consumers really making an informed decision? I have private solar, but I happen to have access to that information, so I make an informed decision. I think what we're talking about is information available to consumers so they can make an informed decision. And I think Chris's point about requiring some of this is spot on. but it doesn't apply to just one product. Now, we are in the hunt for more offerings by the automakers, whether they be Nissan, Toyota, GM. I purchased or I leased a Ford under a program, electric hybrid, and there are going to be new models, as you predict, that are going to come out with better ranges, better features, but that's not going to make the ones that are out there obsolete. So I think the choice that we want to give our electric customers is choice, so that they have a real choice to make informed decisions about fuel, fossil fuel use, whether it's in electricity. Once we get to 100%, every electron in this state will be green. Fossil fuel will still need some help. So the more we can substitute to green electrons for all of our uses and reduce the cost, total energy budget of a family, we're doing a win-win. But it's a psychology thing. People have got to jump in, and the mayor, I know the mayor's looking at this, but we're working with the counties on looking for public transportation to adopt cleaner transportation, and we're on the verge of getting there. And the battery availability and prices are being driven down because of the EV industry. That's what's driving battery technology pricing to go down, and that pricing reduction will help everyone, whether it's in a grid application or in transportation.
Just one quick question to follow up. I appreciate the strong defense of what you guys are doing with the Leaf, but isn't it true you never made any announcements about any of the Teslas? And presumably that's because those are for, rich people. So that's my question. Was the Leaf something
The
that you were
Teslas,
contemplating?
if Tesla came to me and said, we're going to give a $10,000 rebate, I'll offer it.
Fair enough, yeah.
$10,000 over a $30,000 sticker price is a big deal. And it's a choice we want our customers to have. We're not promoting it. We didn't run ads. We're working with Toyota, we're working with others, BMW, to see if they're going to be doing the same thing. This is a national issue, and I don't know what the CAFE standards are going to be or not be under this administration. I do know that California is committed to get clean transportation, and it's the 6th largest economy in the world. What California does will affect the market. So I'm confident California will stay the course and that automakers will stay the course.
Any thoughts from any of our other panelists on this topic?
I think that when you're looking at the program, the Jump Smart Maui program, you have to realize that it was an experimental program. And with every experimental program, you have to have a starting point. And the starting point in creating all of the stations where you can recharge the batteries in order to, and the vehicle that you're going to be using, you're starting at a point that's not going to be the most efficient. It's a given that every year the batteries have gotten more and more sophisticated and they're getting better. I think this year the battery range is over 200 miles, where it started off less than 100. And that's just in just a few short years. The other thing is, as we're putting more and more charging stations in and we're developing the program, now the fear of not being able to recharge is slowly going to be taken out of the spectrum. The ability to hook into the rest of the programs, which is being able to get the chargers at home, being able to use solar panels and to connect up the systems, can only be developed if we start at some point. The general principle that we have to be able to realize is that when we are trying to be able to get the electric vehicles and we're trying to be able to get to be greener, many of the costs of electric vehicles have come down considerably since the first introduction. So that now cars that you can buy with electric motors are comparable in cost to those that are gas-driven. There is a difference in the battery life, and for the most part, I know we were told that it would be better to lease the cars than to buy the cars because the batteries were constantly being improved. And the company that is producing those cars is the one that's really taking the risk because they're leasing it rather than having us purchase it, knowing that the resale value of those cars are going to be very minimal. Why buy an old car when the next year you got a much better mileage and the next year you get much better mileage? But you have to start someplace. Now, this movement, starting with cars, will expand to trucks, has already in Honolulu, the experiment with buses. The buses are much more expensive right at this point, but hopefully as we use more and more of them and the market share will drive the cost down. And we're hoping this will happen across the board. So we're working with some of the automobile companies currently to try and see what we can do to offer universal charging stations. So we can put up a universal charging station coming off of not the electric grid, Maui Electric grid, but off of photovoltaic grids so that we can supplement truly green energy rather than petroleum-based energy. That's where the movement is going to take us, but you have to start someplace and you have to be able to build on those improvements year after year. And when you look at the duration of what we're doing right now, the improvements are coming fast and furious, and the costs are going down so quickly. It's almost unbelievable in the scope of how business normally works. And that's because people have the courage to be able to take the first step and make that initial investment to try and get these cars in play.
A real short wrap.
I'll add very briefly. I think there's a couple things here. One, we know where we want to go, and I think everybody's spoken to this. We want to be carbon free or reduced as much as possible in the years to come. We know also that even today, it saves money for consumers to be able to drive based off of an electric vehicle rather than paying the price for gas. And we know where the trajectories are for that as technology improves and the price continues to come down. So the question ultimately for us is how do we accelerate that process of putting that infrastructure out there in the chicken and egg scenario where you need enough fleet vehicles or cars on the road to justify more EV chargers, but you need chargers to justify selling cars. So how do we get beyond that? That's the role I think that we all collectively have to pay. The second thing I'd add is just that as someone who currently, don't tell anybody, drives a gas-powered car still, mostly because I don't have a place to charge it where I live, we need to get over that hump to be able to provide all the folks who live in places that don't have access to their own charging infrastructure because they live in a condo or what have you. And there's a lot of opportunities there. But if trajectories for trends in general continue as they are, with progress on the development of the new technology as well as autonomous driving, and if prices continue their existing trends today, and I have my car for its average lifespan, I've already bought the last car I'll ever own. And I think that's the question that everybody else needs to start thinking about.
So Hawaii is really at the forefront on the electrification of transportation among a lot of utilities. So our company has been asked to be one of the select utilities to sit in with a very select industry group to meet with the automakers. And I've now done that twice back in Washington, D.C. Under Chatham House rules, we're exchanging information. What do the automakers need to proceed from the electric industry? What does the electric industry foretell what the cars are going to have to do, what kind of features they need? And Hawaii is easier than on the mainland because we have one jurisdiction, because we don't have a highway connecting to another electric company's charging stations. So on the mainland, where you're going from on interstate to another company's area, then the billing protocols are more difficult. We're in the beta versus VHS stage of auto charging, and part of what we're telling the industry, if they do have to, they have to standardize. They have to standardize, and that will make it easier for the electric companies then to provide the kinds of mechanisms to provide reliable charging, whether it's the electric company or a third party. Here's the thing that I think Hawaii is way ahead of. Because we have shorter distances, the battery capacity in many cases is not as big a deal than on the mainland where commute distances are much longer. So we've looked at the Bay Area, for example, where LinkedIn's employee parking as an employee benefit offers 30 miles of charging for employees who drive an electric vehicle. And they did that based upon the demographics. Their employee average range of commute is 30 miles. So they charge up at home, they come to the office, they'll give them a charge for 30 miles to get them home. If they're gallivanting all over the place, then that's up to them. What we're finding as we talk to industry where they have offered workplace charging, the SIPs that we don't need big gulps for people in commuting in Hawaii, except maybe on the Big Island. So the SIPs could be just level 1 charging for most of our EVs, and that will satisfy the range anxiety needs of the EV customer. We're coming up with a workplace charging plan because we think that people who adopt EVs will drive it to work, but they want to be sure they get enough to get home. 8 hours on the job, sipping electricity will get them there. For condos, 40% of our population in Honolulu are in high-rises or multifamily. So Chris is absolutely right. We have to find ways to get them. My daughter moved out of her condo just because the condominium association was so unbending in terms of allowing charging in the parking structure. We're working with a Hawaii-based energy accelerator technology that is using the used Nissan. Once a battery reaches about 80% capacity in a vehicle, Nissan rips it out because of safety issues. They're still very good for grid purposes. So this company, Mobi, FreeWire, is putting them in carts and moving the carts to the car with an app, and this is what's being done at LinkedIn. So the app finds the car, or you call for a charge, the Mobi comes to you, charges you, and then charges you through PayPal. It's a totally cashless transaction, and it's the Uber of charging. So how that applies to our tourist industry, our condominium residences, might be another way we have to look at it in Hawaii because of our special circumstances. It won't be one size fit all, again, a hybrid for Hawaii, but we can lead in how we look at some of these things.
And we do need to move on now. So next topic, and there's no clean segue to this. In Hawaii, wind farms achieve capacity factors well above 55%. On paper, they're extremely efficient. However, bird kills are proving higher than previously estimated. The Kahiava Wind Farm here on Maui is now seeking a 500% increase in the allowed number of Hawaiian hoary bat kills and nene kills. Should we continue to act like solar and wind are equally clean forms of energy, and should the utility at some point change its long-term plans for less wind if the bird kill issue continues to be a problem? And would you like to start with that? On the answer, I know you just talked, we can have some of the other folks too.
Sure. You know, there are trade-offs, obviously, and solar is not completely 100% clean either. I mean, we have to decide, here's the policy issue that we have to, what is our eventual goal? And it can't just be all solar, it can't be all wind, it can't be nuclear, it can't be wave technology, it can't be offshore wind as a part of it. There's got to be a balanced resource mix, and some of our renewable resources have actually better factors for the public and for the grid. However, we, as a utility, offer the planning to try to get us to 100% using information that's available to us. We don't own a wind farm. We put it out for bid, the developers come in, they do the environmental, they do all of the compliance issues, and under contract, we hold them accountable to the contract. And one of the contract clauses is to live by all permitting requirements. They are responsible for that. I think one of the things that people don't understand is that we do all of this for the benefit of our customers, but we have not total control over the independent power producers. We have contractual controls. But on the flip side, we also have contractual obligations to honor our contracts. That's the point of the thing to do. So if they are running into issues that were not foreseen, we we would see that they find ways to comply. On a state policy issue, though, I would say, if our policy has a priority as to what should be in the mix, that's something that the utility company should not be made to make the call. We can offer our opinions, but that's for a higher body.
Sounds like a segue to me. Do you have any thoughts adding color on that?
Sure, let me back it up just one step by saying, I think when it comes to traditional fossil generation versus solar, wind, and the rest of it, there's almost no comparison. When's the last time you saw a solar spill that flooded a bunch of, anyway. But that too, when you talk about carbon emissions as well, you can get to human fatalities, and there's a lot of numbers there, which the current administration, I think, is beginning to dispute in a widespread campaign, but we know what the numbers show already. When it comes to locally, what kinds of projects we want here and the impact it can have on particular communities, and I think we're talking about specific, the merits of specific projects in different areas at this point, where you might have interaction with particular bird populations or other things. I do think there's definitely consideration to be had. There are I think greater efforts now than ever before, particularly because of some of these issues that have come up with what's been in the paper with the hoary bat, but more so with other impacts on those local communities and on the environment in which these projects are being built. And a couple great examples that have raised a lot of attention were the Inter-Island Cable going through the whale sanctuary and other things, the wind farms up in Kahuku and other areas, the offshore wind that's currently being proposed. Even you get into TMT and other similar sorts of situations. And the bottom line for all of that, I think, is that there needs to be a mechanism in place or some sort of process that, from the community's perspective, or in this case, perhaps from some of the potential environmental organizations or others that might otherwise sue on account of some of these impacts, that those concerns are being heard and accounted for as a project moves forward. One of the bills that that's moving through the legislature right now would create, for example, the ability for the PUC to give a preferential rate for a community that hosts a particular kind of energy project if the community is going to face some sort of negative impact. Because everybody stands to benefit on an island when you put in whatever it is that generates power. Everyone's rates hopefully will go down just a little bit, but it's that community that's providing that benefit for everybody. So then the question becomes, all right, if you're going to host that and take the bullet for everybody else on the island, then what else can we give you? I think that's something that is critical moving forward, because what we don't want to see is a situation where situations like this begin to raise greater and greater levels of community opposition that creates greater uncertainty and risk for developers, for investors, for everybody else, as well as ultimately our goal of trying to put in the infrastructure we need to upgrade our grid into the future.
Any other comments?
I think I'm going to wade in on this just a little bit. When we do the impact studies to be able to create these programs, if the studies are done correctly, we should be close to what we expect to be happening. So when we put a percentage of, in this case, killing bats or birds, we should be fairly close. And we're taking those numbers and saying, well, these are the numbers that we take as acceptable, because we realize that there is a risk in everything that we do. However, I think that we need to be held accountable for the research that's being done as well. And we need to make sure that we're not creating too much damage, because many of these species are endangered and cannot be replaced just because there's a wind farm or there's a circumstance. The tolerance level that we have to be able to work with, I think, should be something that we judge on in each area independently, and the impact to the population that we're trying to protect. I don't think there's a one size that fits all. And I don't think that there's going to be anything that's going to say, well, we're 100%, we're not going to do anything. Okay? And we need to be able to move forward, but I think we need to be able to move forward using the best science and the best information that we can gather to be able to protect what we need to protect as well. Now, there are many types of alternative energies. The wind farm is one type, and that's one of the things that we've concentrated on. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at wave energy or other kinds of forms of energy that could replace that. And I believe that when you look at the long-term goals of the state, the geothermal, ocean currents and thermal, those are going to be the predominant types of energy that are going to be creating the most benefit for the community at the lowest cost. So we need to be able to drive more of the research and the money into the areas that we're going to be looking at long-term.
I just want to be careful that I don't want to presume any facts that I don't have on what the takes are and what the environmental impact statement originally predicted and what the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service might come up with as a habitat conservation plan that still protects the species adequately. All of those processes are in place and they can run their course. And we would expect any of our IPPs to seek all of the available avenues to comply and still protect the environment. I think the bottom line is that there is a process. And if the original siting goes through an environmental impact process, that's where it has to be vetted. If conditions change after the fact, then the appropriate agencies have to address them through either the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, our own DLNR, whichever agency has jurisdiction, they have to address it. Because otherwise, we will not be able to move forward with big infrastructure IPPs. Their financing will be at risk if we're going to constantly change the rules and there are no processes to address them. So I don't want to presume that we have all the facts in any of this discussion. I want to stick to the facts. I want to stick to the processes that could address the situation.
But at the same time, Alan, you've got to admit, because we're doing the studies, because there are parameters that are set, those are the guidelines by which we expect the projects to be able to exist. So we're doing that in advance.
But there are processes to address it if it doesn't.
There are processes to address it, and we're not saying don't do the processes. What we're saying is we need to respect those processes, and we need to be able to also drive the direction that we want to go, where we're not going to endanger the natural habitat as much, knowing if other information comes in and says, okay, what we originally thought was going to happen is not happening, and now we're endangering more than we should. That should be taken into consideration, and we might have to change direction.
And Mayor, let me ask you, because our final question here, this ties right in. You've made a number of statements about lowering the cost of electricity and in essence doing a better job if the county were to take over the utility. And so our final question is there a genuine effort by the county to take over MECO, or is this just been a case of frustration as a customer? And if the county wants to lower the cost of electricity, why has it supported projects from Energia that have pricing as much as double what it was costing MECO at the time to make energy? So those are our questions. Could you do a better job? Is this a real effort? And those questions.
Well, as you know, Doug, because you were part of this movement when we started this, we're definitely looking at alternatives and what we can do with the area. When we hired Guernsey to do a report, it wasn't to replace the electric company, it was to find out where and what should we be doing and what goals should we be setting and where and how can we adjust to what would be the most beneficial to the community. Those reports, and the Guernsey report was using leftover money to be able to do it, also recommended that we do further studies, which I believe the state is doing, to be able to try and determine what the best methodology to shift to is. Now, the reality is that since we've started working on this, we've been able to impact the industry tremendously. We're moving from, we cannot do alternative energies, there's no way to get 100%, to a state law that requires 100%. We're moving to the point where we're looking at all of the different rules and regulations that were put in place for rooftop solar. Oh, you have to have studies, and they're going to cost you so much to be able to put up rooftop solars, limiting the number of commercial ventures that could be put in, to put volumes in. We're looking at different changes to the grid system to be able to incorporate all of this. We're looking at different types of energies. All of this was a movement to be able to really explore the area of alternative energies. At the same time, I believe that we've seen the electric company change from what their original model was, which was produce 100% of the power and be able to continue using fuel that we bring into the community, to now really working with the community and trying to explore ways in which we can generate those powers. And that whole movement is evolving very quickly. So every effort that we've put in to be able to focus on this issue, I believe we're getting great rewards from it, because we are changing the very concepts by which we started. Now, it's not only the electric company. We're now talking about alternative fuels. And we're talking about going and getting rid of the carbon footprint almost entirely. So every direction that we have is an evolution following up on the new technologies, the new information that's coming in, different ways of doing the system, better ways that are there. Totally new ideas. And when you talk to everybody in the audience and you find out all of the different concepts that are coming up, none of this would have happened if we didn't really say, enough is enough. Let's do out with the old. Let's start studying what we can do to find the best way to provide for our community in the cleanest way. Now, costs are relative. When you look at China, they were able to build their manufacturing. The cost is they've got pollution that you have to wear respirators for, and now they're desperately trying to be able to move. When we start looking at being able to look at our landfills and the waste that's going into the landfill and being able to convert that to an energy source or to something that's positive for the community, when you start adding up all those things, the fixed price that we're trying to get to, the cost of avoidance that we're trying to get to, was an illusionary number. How can you expect to say the cost that we're supposed to be avoiding, the avoided cost, is a petroleum number that you don't know from day to day what the numbers are going to change? But that was the basis of which the costs were being based on. And when you look at the past, when we've had petroleum costs almost double of what they are today, and you know that in Europe, they're paying double-digit dollars for a gallon of gasoline, you cannot say that the avoided cost in any way, shape, or form was a fixed number that they could count on. And that's one of the illusions that we wanted to get around as well. Any program that we work with, such as Energia, is a 20-year investment, and we'll be able to have a fixed cost that we can deal with. That we know by contract is what we're going to end up with. The electric bill, electric costs for Maui Electric, fluctuates every month, depending on what the cost of fuel is. So you can't say that it is going to cost more. I don't think there's any basis to be able to make that comparison unless you can predict the future and be able to guarantee what next month, next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, the petroleum costs are going to be. And I'd be willing to bet almost anybody here, when we start looking at all the conversion to electric vehicles and alternative energies, the cost of petroleum 20 years from now is going to be considerably more than it is today, just because of the lower quantities that will be put in and because we're a small market.
We're starting to wind down here. Did you have any comments you wanted to add from the state level on that issue?
Sure. I think what came out of, this really came out of the question that came out of Nextera, right? And where things are going in light of not only the changing business model of the utility, but the changing market and the technology that's out there. And for our part, I think at the policy level, where we represent the community, we have an obligation, and not just an interest, but an obligation to vet what those models are going forward on the business front, on the regulatory front. How do we adapt to change that we're seeing that puts the interest of the community first? Because that's our obligation that we have. And I think the utilities, no matter who they are here in the state or elsewhere, have different obligations. IOUs, right? You have to look out for your shareholders as well. But for us, going forward, in the context of the change we're starting to see, I think we have to absolutely at least put on the table and assess what those options are that we can move forward with and which of those options are going to be the best to be able to adapt most effectively and in the consumer interest to the change we're starting to see. And I think, I mean, for me, I think the future absolutely is a distributed future. And not just distributed in the sense that everybody's got a solar panel in their house, but distributed in the sense that technology is expected, and I think everyone assumes, will continue to innovate and will continue to come up with new products. Plug-and-play options that can be put on your house or your car, whatever it is, that ties together your energy universe in your life in a way that we can't even fathom today. And I think the analogy is often made that we're seeing a transition as we did with landline phones, right? The phone company got outperformed by all the wireless carriers now who are out there. And it's that kind of transition we're seeing. I think that is true today. The grid itself is evolving, the utility model is evolving, the regulations, or the regulatory model from the PUC we're seeing ties that all together in different ways with DER and some of the other programmatic rate design that can incent different sorts of options for people. But I do think the analogy 10 years from now will be a different one. 20 years from now, maybe. Whenever that time comes, it's not that. It's not the old phone company model. It's rather the ice distributor in your town when everybody had to go there to get ice for their homes, our grandparents. And they'd buy it and they'd take it home. Well, we all know what happened. Technology evolved to the point not only that distribution changed, but that everybody could then go buy their own freezer without having to worry about any of the traditional things that normally would have prevented that in the future. And so once we get to that point where your battery, your PV, all those other things you have on your own home can be bought down at the hardware store and just plugged right in relatively easily, then that's a whole different model for everybody. And then utilities even acting as an insurance policy, providing power when your stuff breaks, might even be difficult to come up with some sort of workable model. So the question is, how do we put into place a utility model that best adapts to all of that going forward? And I was just I've been traveling all over the place talking with different utilities, and most of the time, I think most of my trips now are to talk not on energy, but on the financing behind energy projects with investors and hedge funds and all those guys. And I think it was a few months ago, one of my last trips, it was a chance where I could actually start to ask some of the folks questions on my end, and I wasn't just presenting. And talking with one of the managers of this particular fund, I asked, what point in the existing IOU model, assuming things don't really change, do you guys pull your money out? And the answer from them was, we've already decided. We decided a year ago. We're already doing that. We're going to pull our money out. There's no question. The question for us is timing. And at what point the canaries in the coal mine out there around the country, the various models that don't adapt, start to feel that impact and start to see higher risk and changing of credit ratings and all the rest of it. And that's something that we need to be cognizant of, whether it's HECO here, KIUC and their financing capacity, anybody else coming in. How do you adapt quickly while maintaining the support necessary to maintain a grid and continue the path of upgrades going forward? Now, whether it's status quo or it is for Maui, looking at an ISO or Big Island Co-op or who knows what else. We've started that process and we've started the due diligence because we have an obligation to, looking at what does it look like if we change? What do those options look like with the amount of money that's out there? What will it mean for consumers? All the rest of it. And I think that's a question that I don't think anybody has an answer to here today. I certainly don't, but it's something that's being entertained because we have to.
I'd like to go ahead and pass on. We've got a number of questions from the audience.
I would really like to address that because I think it would be very unfair for all of you to leave the room saying the utility is going to dry up and investor analysts are out there predicting the doom of the IOU. I'm here to say that we also travel a lot. We also meet with a lot of industry people and consumer groups, and that opposite is true. I think the IOU model is very much alive and well. We can attract capital to do the innovations that are needed to satisfy our customer needs. I think the IOU model, investor-owned utility, is really a good model. It built the United States. The grid is so needed if we're to compete with the rest of the world on a stable platform with reliable, resilient, quality electric service. But we do have to change. And one of the things I'm glad to hear acknowledgement that the company is changing for whatever reason. We're doing it internally because we do recognize that our customers are demanding something different. And so we're very customer-centric, and a lot of the changes we're making, even reorganizing our company, is to become more nimble, to be able to react quicker, and not seek ultimate perfection in everything we do, because that's what utilities traditionally do, because you have to be safe. So we're not going to give up that safety part on those things, but we are creating what I like to call the right brain of the company, to be more creative, nimble, reactive to customers, really creating a marketing department, something that's very foreign to us, new business products and services that will bring us more revenues, that will allow us to reduce the rates overall for our customers by providing value to our customers. We get it. And we're changing as fast as we can to meet customer needs and to meet the state's policies. I will say in the state's policies on 100% renewable, sometimes it's forgotten. There's a phrase there, at reasonable cost. And that's the part that is so difficult for us to thread the needle to say we can do all of this, but try to do it at reasonable cost.
And with that, we are out of time, folks, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up. I'll just leave you all that we got several questions in that we're all asking essentially the same thing. It seems unfair that there's no RPS for transportation fuels or for your competitor, and there is for you. So I will just leave you that seems to be a question out there in the audience that, is it unfair that you are subject to this and not the others? So anyway, it's been a very fast-moving hour. I appreciate all of our panelists
Doug, if I can, just a
participating.
couple seconds. I just like to take this opportunity to say thank you very much for having this. And I will say that we've been working with the electric company throughout this. So it's been an evolution, and they have at times been very, very difficult, and at times we've been able to work things through. But one of the reasons that we are not off-grid in a lot of our facilities, which we could be, is because we're trying to find a cooperative solution. We also know that Molokai and Lanai need to have very, very intense changes made because of the cost. So we are working together. So I don't want anybody not to get that impression.
But anyway, thank you, all of you, for participating in this panel. Thank you, audience.